The sharp scent of antiseptic filled the air like an invisible fog as David Jackson carried his sleepy son through the glass doors of St. Mary's Memorial Hospital. It was nearly midnight, and the rain outside drummed relentlessly against the pavement. The world had gone quiet, but inside David's chest, storms never ceased. "Hold on, buddy," he whispered, his breath catching as he shifted the small body in his arms. Mason, barely 4 years old, stirred weakly against his father's shoulder. His skin felt too warm, his breathing shallow. David's boots squeaked on the tile floor as he approached the reception desk. His jeans were soaked from the knees down, his flannel shirt clinging to his chest. He hadn't slept properly in days, not since Mason's fever had spiked again. The nurse at the desk looked up, her eyes softening. "Sir, what's wrong with your boy?" "His fever won't go down," David said, his voice breaking despite his effort to stay composed. He has that blood condition, the rare one. Dr. Stevens treated him before." Recognition flickered across her face. "Mason Jackson? The little Superman?" David nodded, forcing a weak smile. Mason's favorite blue pajamas, emblazoned with the iconic red S, peeked from beneath the blanket. "Yeah, my little hero." The nurse quickly paged the pediatric ward and gestured toward the waiting area. "Please take a seat. We'll get you in soon." David sat down, cradling his son. Around him, the sterile lights and distant beeps of heart monitors painted an all-too-familiar picture. He had been here too many times. Each visit, another reminder of how fragile life could be. The weight of the world on one father's shoulders. David Jackson wasn't a man who complained. Life had beaten him down before, but he always got back up. A single father working construction, he woke before dawn and returned home long after sunset. But for the past few months, his world had revolved around hospital rooms, pill bottles, and sleepless nights. The doctors called Mason's illness chronic aplastic anemia, fancy words that meant his little boy's bone marrow wasn't making enough blood cells. Without treatment, Mason's immune system would fail. David had already sold his truck, pawned his tools, and taken every extra shift he could find. He'd stopped eating full meals himself, just to afford Mason's medicine. Every dollar went toward survival. When Mason's fever flared up again tonight, David didn't hesitate. He wrapped him in a blanket, kissed his forehead, and carried him into the rain. He didn't own a car anymore, so he walked, 4 miles through puddles and wind. By the time he reached the hospital, his arms ached and his legs felt like lead, but none of that mattered. He would carry Mason across continents if it meant saving him. A glimpse of a world beyond reach after what felt like forever. A nurse called them in. David followed her down the brightly lit corridor. As they passed a large glass conference room, he caught a glimpse of something unusual. A board meeting, even at this late hour. Inside, a group of people in expensive suits surrounded a sleek table. Charts and reports were projected on the wall. Numbers, profits, future expansions. The kind of world David could never be part of. For a moment he paused. It wasn't envy that stopped him. It was disbelief that people could talk about growth metrics while others like him were praying for a child's heartbeat to stay steady. Then Mason stirred. His tiny voice cracked through the silence. "Daddy?" David looked down. Mason's dark eyes fluttered open, hazy with fever. Then suddenly they widened, full of recognition and innocent certainty. "Matty, look," he whispered, pointing through the glass. David followed his gaze. Inside the conference room, at the head of the table stood a woman in a pristine white suit. Her golden hair was tied neatly in a bun, her posture sharp, her presence commanding. Even through the glass, her aura filled the room. The kind of woman who made others listen before she spoke. "That's her," Mason said, his small hand trembling as he pointed. "That's Mommy." David froze. Every sound in the hallway seemed to vanish. "That's not," he started to say, but his voice failed. The woman turned her head at that exact moment, perhaps sensing the gaze upon her. Her eyes met his through the glass wall, icy blue yet unmistakably human. For a heartbeat, her confident expression faltered. Her lips parted slightly and her hand trembled before she quickly composed herself. David's heart dropped into his stomach. Emily, ghosts from the past 2 years. 2 long, brutal years had passed since Emily Mitchell had walked out of his life. They had met a decade ago, a chance encounter at a charity construction project. Emily had been an ambitious young business graduate volunteering to experience real work, and David, the team supervisor with calloused hands and a warm laugh. She had fallen for his authenticity. He had fallen for her fire. Their love had defied expectations, a working-class black man and a rising corporate star. But over time, ambition drew Emily higher and higher into the glittering world of business. When she was offered the chance to run her own division at Mitchell International Health Group, she took it. Then came the fights. The distance. The long nights she didn't come home. Until one day she didn't come home at all. David never blamed her. Not fully. Maybe she wanted more than struggle. Maybe she believed leaving Mason was best for her career. But he could never understand how a mother could forget her child's laughter. And now, she was here, in the same hospital where their son lay sick. The reunion nobody asked for. The conference room door opened with a soft hiss. David tensed. Emily stepped out, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Every eye in the hallway seemed to turn toward her, her power, her presence, her beauty all glowing under the fluorescent lights. But David saw something else behind her mask. Guilt. "David?" she said softly. The sound of her voice tore through him. Mason stirred again, his face lighting up. "Mommy," he squealed, trying to stretch his tiny arms toward her. David flinched as if burned. Emily froze. For a moment, the proud CEO was gone, replaced by the woman who had once sung lullabies at 2 a.m., who had once held their son close and whispered dreams about a better life. Tears welled in her eyes and her voice broke. "David, please, let me hold him." David tightened his grip on Mason. "You don't get to say that now." "David, I didn't know." "You didn't care," he interrupted sharply, his tone cutting. "When he was in pain, when I was begging for help, where were you? Board meetings? Business trips?" You walked away. Emily took a hesitant step forward, her hands trembling. I thought it was better this way. I couldn't give him a stable life back then. I was trying to build something for him." David laughed bitterly. "You built an empire and lost your family." Mason looked between them, his wide eyes confused. "Daddy, don't be mad. Mommy's here now." The innocence in his voice broke both their hearts. Emily knelt on the cold tile floor, her tears dripping freely now. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mommy missed you so much." For a moment, time stopped. Mason's small hand reached out, brushing her cheek. The warmth of his touch melted 2 years of icy distance. David turned away, clenching his jaw. His eyes burned, but his pride refused to break. Not yet. Shadows of regret later that night. When Mason was finally admitted and stabilized, David stood outside the hospital room, staring blankly at the city lights. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside him raged on. Emily approached quietly. She had changed into a simple blouse, her makeup gone, her hair loose, the CEO mask stripped away. She looked human again. "David," she said softly, "I didn't know he was sick. Please believe me. If I had known—" David didn't look at her. "You would have sent money. That's what you people do. You throw money at the problem until it disappears." Emily's lips trembled. "I deserve that. But please, let me make it right. Let me help him." David turned, his eyes full of exhaustion. "You want to help? Then don't just write a check. Sit by his bed. Hold his hand. Watch him fight. Be his mother." Emily's breath caught. "I will," she whispered, tears spilling again. He sighed heavily. "We'll see." And with that, he walked away, not because he hated her, but because he didn't trust hope anymore. Inside the hospital room, Mason slept peacefully for the first time in days. On the nightstand, his little Superman figurine stood tall, a symbol of strength in a world that often broke hearts. Emily stood at the doorway, watching the boy she had once called her world. She placed a trembling hand on the glass and whispered, "Mommy's here now, baby. Mommy's not going anywhere this time." But deep inside she knew, earning forgiveness from David and from herself would be the hardest fight of her life. The next morning, soft sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, falling across the pale sheets where Mason lay sleeping. Machines hummed softly beside his bed, their rhythmic beeping almost like a fragile lullaby. David Jackson sat hunched in the chair by the window, his head resting in his hands. He hadn't slept. Not really. Every time he closed his eyes, memories clawed back. Laughter, promises, betrayal. He had dreamed once of a family, a small house, Mason running barefoot through the yard, and Emily laughing in the kitchen, her hair loose and wild. That dream had turned to ashes the night she left. Now she was back, but not as the woman he remembered, not as his wife. She had returned as Emily Mitchell, the millionaire CEO, the woman who could buy anything except the past she'd destroyed. The return Emily stood at the doorway that morning, clutching a bouquet of lilies. She looked almost out of place, a goddess fallen from her marble pedestal into the world of sorrow and humility. Her white suit from the previous night was gone. Now she wore simple jeans and a light blue sweater. Her eyes softened as she saw Mason, so small against the vastness of the hospital bed. She hesitated before entering. David looked up, exhaustion shadowing his face. "You shouldn't be here." Emily's voice trembled. "He's my son too. You made your choice," he snapped. "You walked away." Her hand shook, but she didn't look away. "And I've paid for it every day since." "You think I didn't miss him? You think I didn't cry for him?" David's jaw clenched. "You left, Emily. When things got hard, you ran." She took a slow step forward. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I was scared that I'd fail him. I thought success would give me power to come back stronger, but I only built walls." Her voice cracked. "Please, David, let me help now." For the first time, David saw something genuine flicker in her eyes. Not arrogance, not pity, but deep regret. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Help? Do you even know what he needs? Do you know what nights feel like when your child stops breathing for 10 seconds and you count every heartbeat?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "No," she admitted softly. "But I want to learn. I want to try." The little Superman, a weak voice, broke the silence. "Mommy?" They both turned. Mason's eyes were open, half-lidded but bright with recognition. His lips curled into a tiny smile. "You came back." Emily rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she brushed his curls away from his forehead. "Yes, baby." "Mommy's here." David watched quietly, torn between anger and something he didn't want to name. Hope. Mason grinned faintly. "Daddy said I'm strong like Superman." Emily smiled through tears. "You're stronger than Superman." The little boy's voice was soft, but each word cut through the air. "Then you're Wonder Woman." David couldn't help it. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. For a brief moment, laughter, real laughter, flickered between them like a forgotten song. The cost of healing. Later that day, Dr. Stevens, a kind but stern man in his 50s, entered the room holding a clipboard. "David, can I talk to you?" David followed him outside. "Mason's condition is worsening," the doctor said carefully. "His body isn't responding to the current treatment. He'll need a specialized transfusion, possibly a bone marrow transplant." David's throat tightened. "How much?" The doctor hesitated. "With private donor testing and hospitalization, about $250,000. David's knees nearly buckled. "I know," Dr. Stevens said quietly. "I wish I could say otherwise. But without it, Mason's chances—" He didn't finish the sentence. David nodded numbly. He'd been fighting battles for years, but this one felt impossible. When he returned to the room, Emily stood by Mason's bed holding his small hand. She looked up immediately, reading the dread in David's eyes. "What is it?" she asked. He swallowed hard. "He needs a transplant. A donor. It's expensive." Emily's heart stopped. "How much?" David hesitated. "Too much." "Tell me," she insisted. $250,000. She blinked, stunned, not by the number but by how calm he was when he said it. Like a man who had long accepted that some mountains couldn't be climbed. "I'll pay it," she said instantly. David's head snapped up. "No, David," I said no. His tone was hard, sharp. "You don't get to buy your way back. Not with money." Her eyes glistened. "It's not about buying anything. It's about saving our son." He stared at her, chest heaving. "You think throwing cash fixes what you broke?" Emily stepped closer. "No, but maybe it fixes what's breaking now." Their eyes locked, pain meeting determination. After a long silence, David finally said, "You pay for his treatment, but you don't get to walk away this time. You stay. You fight with me." She nodded instantly, tears rolling down her cheeks. I promise. Old wounds, new battles, the days that followed were grueling. Emily used her influence to get Mason transferred to a private room with the best specialists. She personally arranged testing for bone marrow donors and sat through every late-night update. David was wary at first, but as the days went by, he couldn't ignore the truth. She was trying. At 3 a.m., he would find her asleep beside Mason's bed, her hand still clutching his. At 7, she'd be on a video call with the hospital board, arguing for faster approvals. Her power, once a weapon of pride, had become a tool for love. But redemption wasn't easy. One afternoon, while Mason was resting, David stepped out to grab coffee. When he returned, he overheard 2 nurses whispering near the doorway. "That's Emily Mitchell, right? The CEO?" one said. "Yeah, the one who abandoned her family years ago." Guess guilt finally caught up. David's hands clenched into fists, but Emily's voice stopped him. She had heard them too. "It's okay," she said quietly to the nurses. "They're right." When the women scurried away, she looked at David with wet eyes. "They're right," she repeated. "I abandoned you both," David sighed. "You can't change what they think. You can only change what you do now." She nodded slowly. "Then I'll keep showing up, until Mason never has to wonder again if his mother loves him." A spark of hope weeks passed. Mason's laughter began to return, fragile but bright. He loved drawing pictures of his super family, himself as Superman, Daddy as Iron Man, and Mommy as Wonder Woman. One evening, as the sunset bathed the hospital in golden light, Emily sat beside Mason, reading a bedtime story. "Daddy used to read this one," Mason said sleepily. "He does the voices better." Emily chuckled softly. "I'll have to practice then." David leaned against the doorway, watching them. For the first time in years, peace felt possible. But peace never lasts long. Dr. Stevens entered later that night, his expression grave. "We've found a potential donor match," he said. David's heart leaped. "That's great." The doctor hesitated. "Yes, but the donor is unusual," Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" The doctor looked between them. "The donor match came from you, Ms. Mitchell." The room fell silent. Emily's breath caught. "Me?" David stared, stunned. "Yes," the doctor confirmed. "It's extremely rare for a parent to be a full genetic match, but in this case, you are. The transplant can proceed as soon as you're ready." Emily's hands trembled. "Then do it. Do it now." David stepped forward, alarm flashing across his face. "Wait, what are the risks?" The doctor hesitated. "For adults, marrow extraction can be painful. There are risks of infection, fatigue, possible complications." Emily didn't even blink. "I don't care. If it saves him, I'll do it." David's voice softened. "Emily, think this through." She turned to him, her eyes fierce. "I've thought through every mistake I've ever made. This is one thing I won't regret." That night, when the hospital quieted, David sat by Mason's bedside, staring at his son's peaceful face. Emily was in the next room, preparing for the donor procedure. He could hear the faint hum of machines and the low murmur of nurses. For the first time in years, he whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for both of them. "God, if she's really changed, don't let her die proving it." The dawn of the operation day came quietly. No thunderstorms, no drama. Just a pale gold sunrise spreading across the hospital's glass windows. For most, it was an ordinary morning. But for David Jackson, Emily Mitchell, and their little boy Mason, it was the beginning of something that would change their lives forever. The corridors of St. Mary's Memorial Hospital were hushed, the fluorescent lights flickering softly as nurses moved swiftly through the halls. Inside room 307, Mason slept soundly, his chest rising and falling with the fragile rhythm of borrowed time. David sat beside him, holding the small hand that felt too cold for comfort. Across the hall, Emily lay on a gurney dressed in a light blue surgical gown, her blonde hair tucked under a cap. The steady beep of her heart monitor echoed faintly in the background. When the door opened, she turned her head and saw David standing there. He looked exhausted, unshaven, and uncertain, but he was there. A father's doubt. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, filled with years of unspoken pain, lost time and what-ifs. "You don't have to do this," David said quietly, his voice rough from sleepless nights. Emily smiled faintly. "Yes, I do." He stepped closer. "They said there are risks. I know, she interrupted gently. But if my marrow gives him another chance, I'd give more than that, he clenched his fists. You think this makes up for everything? She shook her head. No, it's not about making up for the past. David, it's about changing what comes next. He stared at her, searching for the woman he once knew, the one who used to chase dreams, laugh in thunderstorms, and promise she'd never give up. She was still there, just buried under years of ambition and regret. When he finally spoke, his voice softened. He needs you alive, Emily. Not as some kind of hero who died to prove a point. Emily's eyes shimmered. Then I'll live keen for him. For both of you. A nurse entered, checking her IV line. We'll be ready in 10 minutes, Ms. Mitchell. Emily took a deep breath. David, she said, her voice trembling. Whatever happens today, promise me one thing, he frowned. What? Promise you won't let Mason grow up hating me. His jaw tightened. He doesn't hate you. He misses you. Tears filled her eyes. That's worse, David didn't reply. He reached out instead, took her hand, the firm, warm, alive, and whispered, Come back to him. That's all I want. The operation. The surgical wing smelled of sterilized metal and cold air. Emily was wheeled into the donor room while Mason was prepped in the pediatric unit. Through the small glass window separating the rooms, David could see both his son and the woman who had once been the love of his life, both lying still, both hooked to machines that hummed like distant thunder. Dr. Stevens oversaw the procedure personally. We'll extract the bone marrow from Ms. Mitchell's pelvic region, he explained earlier. It's painful, but under anesthesia, the cells will be immediately transferred to Mason. Hours passed. The clock hands seemed frozen. David paced the corridor endlessly, each tick sounding like a countdown to hope or despair. He prayed. For the first time in years, he truly prayed, and then it was over. The doors opened and a nurse stepped out, her face calm. The procedure went well, she said softly. Both are stable. We'll monitor them closely over the next few days. David exhaled so hard it almost hurt. His legs felt weak. He wanted to drop to the floor and thank God. Recovery and reflection. 3 days later, Emily was sitting up in bed, pale but smiling weakly. Mason was down the hall, his color returning, his energy growing a little each hour. When David entered her room, she turned her head toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. How's he doing? He smiled for the first time in weeks. He asked for pancakes this morning. Emily's eyes filled with tears. That's my boy. Yeah, David said, his voice thick with emotion. That's our boy. For a moment, they both sat in silence. It wasn't the awkward silence of strangers anymore. It was the peaceful quiet of two people remembering what love once felt like. David leaned against the window. You scared me, Emily smirked weakly. You always said I was reckless. Yeah, he murmured. But brave, too. The world outside news of Emily's anonymous marrow donation had quietly spread through the hospital. Some staff whispered her name in admiration. Others remembered her reputation as a ruthless CEO and wondered if she had truly changed. But to David, none of that mattered. He saw something the world couldn't. The way she smiled at Mason, the way her hands trembled when she read bedtime stories, the way she looked at life now, as if every second was a gift. One evening, a light drizzle fell outside. David walked into her room carrying 2 cups of cheap hospital coffee. You shouldn't be out of bed, he teased. She smiled. And you shouldn't drink that, he chuckled. Fair point. They sat quietly, watching the rain trickle down the window pane. Do you ever think about us? Emily asked softly. He hesitated. Every day. But the us I think about doesn't exist anymore. Her gaze lowered. Maybe it can again. A new version, he sighed. Emily. I know, she whispered. You don't trust me, not yet. I don't blame you. David looked at her for a long time before speaking. You're right. I don't trust you, but I see the woman you're trying to become, and that's a start. The gift of belief. A week later, Mason was released from the ICU. His recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The doctors called it a promising response. David wheeled him into the hospital garden, where Emily was waiting under a tree, wrapped in a blanket. The boy's face lit up when he saw her. Mommy, he shouted. Emily opened her arms as Mason jumped from the wheelchair and ran into her lap. Tears streamed down her face as she hugged him tightly. I missed you every day, he said, his tiny voice muffled against her chest. I missed you more, she whispered, kissing his forehead. So much more. David watched from a few feet away, his heart heavy and light at the same time. Emily looked up, smiling through tears. He said he wants pancakes again tonight. David laughed softly. Guess you're cooking then, she grinned. I never stopped burning pancakes, remember? Yeah, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. And you never stopped trying. Whispers of change days turned into weeks. Emily refused to leave the hospital even after she was cleared. She attended every checkup, every blood test, every consultation. Her board of directors called, demanding her return to headquarters. But for once, she didn't care about quarterly earnings or market shares. Her priority was sitting right beside her, a little boy who liked to call her Mommy Wonder. One afternoon, as Mason colored on his tablet, David stood beside Emily, watching. You know, he said quietly, he's stronger than both of us. She smiled faintly. He always was. David glanced at her. You planning to go back to your empire soon? She hesitated. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it's time I build something else. He raised an eyebrow. Like what? Emily looked at Mason and said softly, something that doesn't cost love. The latter one evening, while Mason was sleeping, David found Emily sitting alone in the hospital chapel. The soft glow of candles cast long shadows across her face. She held a folded letter in her hands. What's that? He asked. She smiled sadly. My resignation, he blinked. You're quitting? Yes, she said. I've spent years healing other people's companies. Maybe it's time I start healing my own family. David sat beside her, silent. I built a world where everyone admired me, she continued. But no one knew me. Mason's the only person who ever looked at me and saw something good, and even when I didn't deserve it. Her voice cracked. That's what love does, doesn't it? It sees the broken parts and calls them beautiful. David swallowed hard. Yeah, it does. They sat there side by side, two broken hearts quietly mending under the soft flicker of hope. A second chance weeks later, when Mason was strong enough to walk on his own, the three of them left the hospital together. The world outside looked brighter, not because the sky had changed, but because they had. Emily held Mason's hand tightly as they stepped into the sunlight. David followed close behind, his heart strangely at peace. For the first time in years, they weren't just three people bound by blood. They were a family again, fragile, imperfect, but real. Mason tugged at both their hands and said with a grin, Can we go home now? Emily and David exchanged a glance. David smiled. Yeah, buddy. Let's go home. The promise that night? As they tucked Mason into bed in David's small apartment, Emily looked around the room, the cracked walls, the secondhand furniture, the love that filled every corner. Thank you, she whispered. For what? He asked. For not giving up on him. For not giving up on me. David smiled faintly. You came back. That's what matters. She reached for his hand, hesitated, then intertwined her fingers with his. This time I'm not leaving. He looked at her, really looked. And for the first time in years, he saw not the CEO, not the woman who left, but the woman who fought her way back. And in that quiet moment, forgiveness wasn't spoken. It was felt. The city had never looked so alive. The morning sun spilled over the rooftops, bathing everything in warm golden light. The breeze carried the scent of fresh rain and new beginnings. For David Jackson, it was the first morning in years that didn't begin with worry. Mason was finally home. He was laughing again, eating again, living again, and every giggle that echoed through their small apartment reminded David of how close they had come to losing him, and how far they had come together. And then there was Emily. She wasn't the same woman who had left 2 years ago. The sharp-edged CEO was gone. In her place stood someone quieter, softer, still strong but now anchored by humility. She had traded her marble office and tailored suits for jeans, sneakers, and burnt pancakes in David's kitchen. But as peaceful as it seemed, the real battle was only beginning. The world outside their walls news travels fast in the modern world, especially when it involves a billionaire. A single headline spread across social media within days. CEO donates marrow to save her son's life. Secret family revealed. Reporters swarmed outside the hospital, then outside David's modest building. Cameras flashed through car windows. Questions shouted. Rumors twisted truth into chaos. Emily Mitchell, founder of Mitchell International Health Group, seen with a construction worker and child, alleged family reunion. David tried to shield Mason from it all. He stopped answering the phone, stopped watching the news, and drew the curtains tighter each day. Emily, however, couldn't hide. The empire she'd built for a decade demanded answers. Her board members called nonstop. Investors panicked. Competitors whispered that she'd lost her mind. One evening, as Mason slept, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, staring at hundreds of unread emails. David placed a cup of tea beside her. "You're still trying to fight them, huh?" She sighed. "They want a statement. They think I'm destroying the company's image." He leaned against the counter. "And what do you think?" She looked up, meeting his eyes. "I think I'm done living for image." A war between two worlds. The next morning, Emily drove to her company headquarters for the first time in months. The skyscraper loomed like a monument to her old self, glass cold and unreachable. Inside, her boardroom buzzed with unease. Men and women in sharp suits eyed her warily as she entered. "Emily," said Richard Vaughn, her senior vice president, "we were beginning to wonder if you'd forgotten your responsibilities." She set her bag down unbothered. "I haven't forgotten. I've just remembered what actually matters. Your actions have caused a PR nightmare," another board member snapped. "The media's speculating about your personal life." "We're losing investor confidence," Emily folded her hands calmly. "Let them speculate. For years I let you all believe I was made of stone. Maybe it's time they saw I'm human." Richard frowned. "This isn't you. The Emily Mitchell we know doesn't get distracted by emotions." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe you never really knew me." Gasps rippled through the room. She stood gathering her papers. "If being a mother and a decent human being costs me this job, so be it. But I won't be ashamed of saving my son's life." And with that, she walked out, her heels echoing down the corridor like thunder. Homecoming. When she returned home that evening, David was cooking dinner. The smell of garlic and onions filled the air. Mason sat at the table, coloring another picture, this time of all three of them holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Emily slipped off her coat and kissed Mason's head. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" "Our family," he said proudly. "This is me, this is Daddy, and this is you." David glanced at the picture and smiled softly. "It looks perfect to me." Emily's eyes glistened. For all her billions, this scrap of paper meant more than any award or title she'd ever won. "Dinner's almost ready," David said. "Hope you like burnt chicken," she laughed. "After my pancakes?" "I can't judge." For a moment, the room was filled with warmth, laughter, chatter, the simple beauty of togetherness. But just as quickly, reality intruded. Emily's phone buzzed again, an email from her attorney. David noticed the look on her face. "More company drama?" She hesitated. "They want me to attend a press conference." "To explain everything," he frowned. "Explain what?" "That you're human?" "I guess they'd rather have a robot running things." He crossed his arms. "And what do you want?" Emily looked at him. "I want to stop running. From them, from you, from myself." Facing the world the next day, she stood before dozens of cameras, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I built Mitchell International Health Group to heal people," she began, "but somewhere along the way I forgot how to heal myself." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the sea of reporters. "I walked away from the people who loved me most because I thought success would make me worthy. I was wrong. My son's illness reminded me what true strength looks like, and not in power but in love." Flashes erupted. Microphones extended. "Are you confirming the rumors, Ms. Mitchell?" One reporter shouted. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'm a mother. I'm proud of it. And I'm proud of the man who raised our son when I didn't have the courage to." That clip spread like wildfire. But unlike before, the public reaction was different. Instead of judgment, there was admiration. Her honesty disarmed people. The headlines changed tone overnight. CEO's emotional confession inspires millions. From boardroom to motherhood, Emily Mitchell's journey of redemption. For the first time, the world saw her not as an untouchable business icon, but as a woman who had fallen and chosen to rise differently. Rebuilding trust that evening, Emily returned home exhausted but lighter. David met her at the door, crossing his arms playfully. You survived the media circus, she smiled faintly. Barely. Mason ran up, waving his drawing. Mommy, you were on TV. I told my teacher you're the best mommy in the world. Her throat tightened. Did you now? He nodded proudly. Everyone clapped. Tears stung her eyes. She scooped him up, holding him close. You're my real award, Mason. David watched them quietly, a faint smile softening his rough features. Later, when Mason was asleep, they stood on the balcony, the night wind cool and quiet. The city lights flickered below, the same city that had once swallowed them whole. You really did it, David said softly. You stood up there and told the world the truth. She looked at him, her voice steady. I wasn't brave. Just tired of pretending. He turned toward her. I've spent years trying to hate you, Emily. But watching you today, I realized something. She held her breath. What? He exhaled. Hate takes too much energy. Love's easier, even when it hurts. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was full, now full of understanding, history, forgiveness. The invitation. A month later, Emily was officially replaced as CEO, but she didn't fight it. Instead, she launched a new nonprofit foundation, the Mason Hope Initiative, dedicated to funding treatments for children with rare diseases. David helped build its first clinic, literally, hammering nails, painting walls, working with volunteers. Emily handled the fundraising, turning her old network into something meaningful. They worked side by side, not as CEO and worker, not even as exes, but as partners. One evening, after the clinic's completion ceremony, they stood outside under the setting sun. Mason played nearby, laughing with other children. Emily looked at David, her voice soft. I used to dream of changing the world, but now I just want to make his world beautiful. David smiled. You already have. She looked at him, a glimmer of vulnerability in her eyes. Do you think people like us get second chances? He hesitated, then smiled faintly. Maybe not everyone, but maybe we do. The dance of forgiveness that night at a small celebration, the room buzzed with laughter and music. Volunteers danced, doctors toasted, and for the first time in years, David and Emily found themselves swaying together under the dim lights. I didn't know you could dance, she teased softly. He chuckled. That's because you never stuck around long enough to find out. She winced slightly. Fair. He looked down at her. You're different now. I had to lose everything to remember who I was. Their hands intertwined naturally, like two puzzle pieces rediscovered after years apart. When the song ended, neither moved away. Mason's voice suddenly called from across the room, Mommy, Daddy, come see my drawing. They both laughed, breaking apart and walking over to him. The picture showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a banner that read, My family, always together. David looked at Emily and whispered, He's a better storyteller than both of us. Emily smiled through tears. He's our happy ending. But fate wasn't finished. As they drove home that night, Mason fell asleep in the back seat, clutching his Superman doll. Emily turned to David. For the first time in years, I feel free, he smiled. Good. You earned it. But life has a way of testing peace. The car behind them sped through a red light. Tires screeched, metal screamed, and everything went black. The world went silent before it shattered. There was the sound of screeching tires, breaking glass, and then nothing. Just the echo of stillness. When David Jackson opened his eyes, everything hurt. The night sky spun above him in fragments of light and smoke. The car was twisted metal. Flames flickered near the hood. Emily, he croaked, turning his head. Mason! He tried to move, pain shooting through his ribs like lightning. He crawled toward the back seat, his hands shaking. There, Mason, unconscious but breathing, his tiny face pressed against the car seat, his Superman toy still clutched in one hand. Relief and terror collided in David's chest. Then he heard her, a faint, broken whisper from the front seat. David, Emily. She was slumped against the steering wheel, blood trickling from her forehead. The airbag had deployed, but the impact had crushed the driver's side door inward. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alive. Don't move, he gasped, crawling toward her. I've got you. Her lips trembled into the smallest smile. You always did. The longest night sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. David struggled to pry open her door, his palms slick with blood. Come on, he groaned, pushing against the twisted metal. Emily's voice was faint. Is Mason okay? David turned, checking quickly. He's breathing. He's okay. You just hang on. She closed her eyes for a moment, tears slipping down her cheek. Good, that's good. The paramedics arrived within minutes, cutting through the wreckage. They lifted Mason out first, then David, then Emily. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, her hand reached out weakly. David? He caught it, holding tight. I'm right here. Her voice was barely a whisper. Promise me. If anything happens, don't, he said fiercely. You're going to make it, but she smiled faintly through the pain. Promise me you'll keep believing in love. Even when it hurts. Tears blurred his vision. I promise. And then she slipped into unconsciousness. Between life and death. The hospital lights burned brighter than ever that night. Mason was treated for minor injuries. A miracle, the doctor said. David had 2 broken ribs, a fractured arm, and a deep cut across his temple. But Emily, she was in surgery for 6 hours. Internal bleeding, shattered ribs, a punctured lung. The same hospital that had witnessed their reunion now held them again, this time between life and death. David sat outside the operating room, his hands trembling, his heart pounding in silent prayer. Mason lay sleeping across his lap, bandaged but peaceful. Every second felt like eternity. When the doors finally opened, Dr. Stevens stepped out. His face was drawn, exhausted. She made it through the surgery, he said slowly, but she's in critical condition. The next 24 hours are crucial. David exhaled shakily. Can I see her? The doctor hesitated, then nodded. For a moment. The woman who never gave up, she looked fragile, tubes and wires everywhere, machines beeping steadily. But even in that state, there was something powerful about her stillness. David sat beside her, gently taking her hand. You did it again, he whispered. You scared me half to death, but you made it. Her eyelids fluttered weakly. David? I'm here, she tried to smile. Did Mason? He's fine, he said quickly. He's okay. You saved him. Her lips curved upward, tears forming. Thank God. David swallowed hard, his throat tight. You rest now. You've done enough saving for one lifetime. Her eyes found his, glimmering even through the pain. You're wrong, she whispered. I've got one more thing to save. What's that? He asked softly. She smiled faintly. Us. Miracles in motion hours turned into days. Against all odds, Emily's condition slowly improved. The doctors called it unexplainable recovery. David called it faith. Mason was allowed to visit her on the 5th day. When he walked into her room carrying a small bouquet of daisies, her heart monitor skipped a beat. Mommy, he shouted, climbing carefully onto the bed. She laughed weakly, wrapping one arm around him. Hey, my Superman. You scared me, he said softly, his eyes wide. She kissed his forehead. I scared myself too. David stood by the doorway watching, unable to hold back the tears that finally escaped. For years he'd prayed for healing, for peace, for strength. But he never realized the greatest miracle wasn't survival, it was change. Emily had found her way back, not just to Mason, but to herself. The foundation of hope months later. After long rehabilitation, Emily stood once again, shaky but determined. The accident had left her with scars and a limp, but also with renewed purpose. The Mason Hope Initiative expanded into 3 new hospitals, providing free treatment to children with rare illnesses. Every wall bore the same inscription she'd written herself. Love heals deeper than medicine ever can. David became the project's construction director, leading teams to build the new centers. Their lives were simpler now, but richer than ever. One day, during a ribbon-cutting ceremony, a reporter asked, Ms. Mitchell, after everything you've been through, what keeps you going? Emily smiled, looking at David and Mason standing nearby. Love, she said simply. The kind that doesn't give up when everything else does. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. But for once, she didn't see headlines, only faces. Grateful parents. Smiling children. A future built from pain, hope, and forgiveness. The Wedding Under the Oak Tree. 2 years later, on a spring afternoon, the old oak tree behind the clinic was decorated with ribbons and white flowers. A small gathering of friends and children surrounded the area. Mason, now 6, stood proudly holding a tiny pillow with 2 simple silver rings. David turned, straightening his tie nervously. Emily walked toward him in a soft cream dress, sunlight glowing against her hair. She still limped slightly, but every step was full of grace. When she reached him, her eyes sparkled. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" He smiled. "Every day, even when I didn't believe it." As they exchanged vows, the world seemed to pause. "I promise," Emily said, her voice trembling, "never to run from love again. Not from you, not from him, not from myself." David took her hand, tears shining in his eyes. "And I promise to never let go no matter what comes." Mason shouted, "Kiss already." Laughter erupted, and when they kissed, it wasn't just a wedding. It was the closing of wounds that had taken years to heal. The legacy years later, people would still talk about the woman who gave up her empire to rebuild her heart, and the man who never stopped believing. But their story wasn't about wealth or fame. It was about love rediscovered in the ashes of pain. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Emily sat on the porch with David, watching Mason play in the yard. "He's growing so fast," she whispered. David smiled. "He's got your strength. And your heart," she replied softly. They sat in silence for a while, hand in hand, as fireflies began to glow in the dusk. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. "We've been through hell and back, haven't we?" "Yeah," David said with a chuckle. "But look where we ended up," she smiled, her eyes closing. "Home." Epilogue. The light that never fades. Years later, Mason, now a grown man, stood before a crowd of students at a university auditorium. Behind him, a large screen displayed photos, his parents, their foundation, their hospitals. He smiled warmly as he spoke. "My parents taught me that success isn't measured by what you build, but by who you save. My mother used to say, 'Love heals deeper than medicine ever can.'" He paused, his voice thick with emotion. And she was right. Because love, real love, doesn't end when people leave. It lives on in every act of kindness, every second chance, every broken heart that chooses to forgive. The audience rose in applause. Outside the hall, a plaque shone beneath the sunlight. "In memory of Emily Mitchell and David Jackson, a love that healed the world."